Why would anyone walk into a valley they knew they might never walk out of? That question echoed in her head with every step she took down the narrow, dust-covered road, a single figure cutting through the morning haze of an Afghan valley that had swallowed empires. Staff Sergeant Riley Clark had been here before. Not this exact valley, but others like it, all teeth and shadows, waiting to devour anyone foolish enough to underestimate them. The mountains loomed on both sides, jagged and ancient, as if carved by the memory of every soldier who'd ever died there. She adjusted her grip on her M4, feeling the familiar texture of the weapon's grip under her gloves. 7 pounds of polymer and steel, her only companion now. 30 rounds. 1 magazine. No backup. No extraction. The radio in her ear still hissed with command chatter from 300 kilometers away. Reaper 1, you are not cleared for solo approach. Wait for backup. ETA 45 minutes. 45 minutes. She stopped, eyes scanning the valley. 45 minutes meant 3 more villages burned, dozens of civilians executed, and the man she'd been tracking for 6 months, Karim Shah, would vanish again into the borderlands of Pakistan, just like every other ghost they'd chased. She exhaled once. Then she reached up, pressed 2 fingers to the side of her helmet and flicked her radio off. Silence. Not protocol. Not approved. And if she lived long enough to face a review board, definitely career-ending. But sometimes orders sounded different when you were the one standing where the bullets would fall. Her boots crunched against the dirt, the sound swallowed by the vast stillness. The morning sun bled over the ridges, burning away mist that hung low over the valley floor. Somewhere in those shadows, there were at least 15 fighters, maybe 20, according to intel. Manageable numbers for a Delta operator with a team. But she wasn't a team today. She was alone. And intelligence had a bad habit of being wrong. She'd been with Delta for 6 years, long enough to know that bravery didn't mean lack of fear. It meant walking forward with fear screaming in your head. Her vest felt lighter than usual. No spare magazines. No grenades. Her last 2 were used the day before. Her sidearm carried 15 rounds. That was it. 30 in the rifle, 15 in the Glock. 45 reasons to stay alive. She scanned the ground instinctively, her tactical mind processing every small detail, the curve of the road, the possible lines of sight, the wind direction, the sound of distant goats on the hillside. Then she saw them. Footprints, dozens of them, fresh. Riley crouched low, gloved fingers brushing over the damp soil. The dew had only just been disturbed. Within the last hour, maybe less. Different shoe sizes, sandal prints mixed with boots, locals and professionals together. More than 20. Way more. Her stomach tightened. The first shot cracked past her head before the thought could finish forming. She dove behind a jagged boulder as automatic fire erupted from both sides of the valley. The air filled with dust and the snapping echo of gunfire ricocheting off stone. Not 15 fighters. Not 20. The muzzle flashes came from everywhere, 30 positions at least. It was a trap. A perfect professional ambush. And she'd walked right into it. The boulder vibrated under the impact of incoming rounds. Chips of rock cut into her cheek. Riley's mind didn't panic, it calculated. Fall back? No. The way behind her was already closing as fighters moved from concealment. Push forward. That meant charging straight into the heaviest fire. Go up the valley walls. Too steep. She'd be a silhouette and easy kill. There were no good options, only less bad ones. Then through the smoke and gunfire she saw movement ahead, shapes breaking from cover, spreading wide, moving with disciplined precision. Not the usual scattered militants she'd faced before. These men wore tactical gear. Helmets, plate carriers. Their formations were coordinated. She counted fast: 30, 35, 40. 40 armed soldiers, closing in on her position. She looked down at her rifle, 30 rounds. Even if every shot was perfect, and no one was perfect in combat, she'd still come up 10 short. 40-1, she murmured to herself. Bad math, Riley. Her chest tightened, but not with fear, with anger. At command. At herself. At the simple, stupid fact that she'd known this could happen and walked in anyway. But retreat wasn't in her vocabulary. Not when people's lives were at stake. She rolled to her stomach, checking her remaining gear, 2 smokes, 1 frag, and the training that had beaten 90% of candidates into quitting. It wasn't much, but she'd make it work. She always did. She pulled the frag from her vest, thumbed the pin. 1 grenade couldn't kill 40 fighters, but it could buy her a chance. She cooked it 2 seconds, 1, 2, then threw it toward the densest cluster of muzzle flashes on her right. The blast shook the valley, scattering dust and screams. Before the echo faded, Riley was already moving, sprinting left toward the valley wall, firing in controlled bursts. 3-round bursts. Aimed shots. Training overriding panic. She dropped 2 men who appeared in her path. 25 rounds left. A PKM opened up from above, cutting the ground around her like a buzzsaw. She dove behind another rock formation, lungs burning, trying to think. The gunner's position, 40 meters away, slightly elevated, sandbags visible. 2 operators, gunner and assistant. She peeked, just long enough to see movement. Then she moved up, sight picture, breath steady. 1 shot, gunner dropped. 2nd shot, assistant down. 2 rounds, 23 left. They were trying to flank now. She heard shouting in Pashto, commands echoing from multiple angles. They were coordinating, bounding forward, covering each other's movement. Professional. She popped a smoke grenade, rolled it downhill, and watched the valley disappear into thick gray fog. That was her window. She sprinted through the haze, her boots sliding on loose gravel as she climbed toward higher ground. Her heart pounded, but her breathing was steady, years of training turning fear into fuel. When she reached a natural rock outcrop, she dropped to 1 knee, scanning. This position gave her better angles, not perfect, but better. Then the first fighter came into view, overconfident, moving fast, assuming the smoke had hidden his approach. Riley waited. 20 meters, that was her comfort zone. 1 round, he dropped instantly. 22. 2 more tried to move in tandem. She tracked them with the calm of a sniper, not the rush of a soldier. 2 shots. 20 left. They shouted again, "She's up in the rocks," and began spreading to flank. Riley shifted position, keeping her silhouette broken behind the boulders. When 3 fighters appeared on the left side, bunched together, she didn't hesitate. 3 rounds, 3 targets. 17. She spun just as movement flickered on the right, 2 fighters bursting through smoke. They fired first. She felt the hits slam into her plate carrier, 2 sharp impacts, like being punched by steel. The armor held. Her body hit the ground, breath gone, but her finger stayed steady on the trigger. Both attackers went down. 15 rounds. She rolled, gasping, her ribs aching from the force. The edges of her vision pulsed black for a second, but she forced herself upright. Pain meant alive. Alive meant still fighting. Her training kept the panic out. Count your ammo, reassess terrain, adjust angles. Every decision mattered now. She had maybe dropped 12 confirmed, wounded a few more, 20 plus still alive. Her odds were the same as before, only now she was bruised, low on ammunition, and alone on a cliffside that could turn into her grave. Then she heard it, the low rumble of an engine echoing through the valley. A truck. Riley crawled to the edge of her position, peering down through her scope. A technical vehicle was climbing the road, a mounted DSHK heavy machine gun on the back. If they got that gun in range, it wouldn't matter what cover she had. She steadied herself, ignoring the pain in her ribs. The gunner was visible, partially shielded, scanning for movement. She had seconds. She exhaled, half a breath out, squeeze. The gunner dropped forward, lifeless. The driver jerked, startled 3 rounds through the windshield clean and fast. The truck veered, stalled, and stopped. 11. The sudden silence broke the rhythm of the firefight. Fighters hesitated. Even professionals feel doubt when someone alone kills with that kind of precision. Riley seized the moment, switching her radio back on. Command, Reaper 1, engaged in Valley 7, multiple hostiles 25 plus. Request immediate air support and QRF. Low on ammo, cannot sustain long. Static, then, Reaper 1 confirm location, air support 12 minutes out, ground team 30. 12 minutes. She swallowed hard, roger that. 8 rounds, maybe 9 in the mag, 20 plus enemies, 12 minutes. Her body trembled not from fear but exhaustion. She could taste iron in her mouth. The valley smelled like dust and burnt powder. She looked at her rifle, the scratches, the worn grip, the weapon that had carried her through 4 deployments. This was probably where it would end. But there were still civilians who'd live because she didn't wait 45 minutes. Still hostages who might get rescued because she'd chosen to act. She pressed her forehead to the cool rock for a heartbeat, then lifted her rifle again. Because sometimes you don't walk into a valley to survive, you walk in so someone else does. And that was something Riley Clark could live or die with. The blast came before she even saw the smoke trail. A deep metallic whoosh, the kind that every soldier learns to dread, and then the world tore sideways. The RPG hit 10 feet from her cover. The shock wave slammed into her body, lifting her off the rocks. For a heartbeat, the valley spun, sky and stone trading places. Then she hit the ground hard. Her ears rang with a dull, endless hum. Her rifle was gone, so was her breath. She lay there, stunned, grit in her teeth, lungs screaming for air that wouldn't come. When her vision steadied, the world had gone soft around the edges. Dust drifted down like snow. Somewhere in that haze, men were shouting, moving closer. She reached for her left arm. It hung wrong, useless, dislocated, maybe broken. Blood ran down her face from tiny shrapnel cuts. The metallic taste of it mixed with dust. Her first instinct wasn't fear, it was irritation. "I don't have time for this," she muttered. Her training kicked in. Move, get to cover, assess. She crawled toward a boulder, dragging her injured arm behind her, right hand still reaching for her sidearm. Her Glock was where it always was, holstered on her thigh. She drew it, thumb brushing the safety off. 15 rounds. 15 lifelines. Voices drew closer. A figure appeared through the smoke, rifle low, moving cautiously. He thought she was dead. Riley waited until he was within 10 meters. Then 2 quick shots sent her mass. He fell without a sound. 13 left. 2 more shapes followed, shouting in Pashto. They tried to rush together. She didn't think, she just reacted, controlled pairs just like training. Both dropped before they could fire. 9. The air smelled of cordite and heat. She could barely hear her own breathing over the ringing in her head. The pain in her arm was a constant pulse, sharp and hot. She moved again, pulling herself tighter against the rock. Her vision blurred for a moment. She blinked hard until it cleared. Focus, Riley, focus or die. They figure out her position again soon. She could hear them regrouping. Barked orders, boots scraping rock, the sound of a magazine being slammed into place. They weren't going to rush blind this time. They flank, suppress, finish her properly. 9 rounds. 12 minutes, command had said, but 12 minutes was a lifetime out here. And then, a sound that didn't belong in the valley. Low, powerful, fast. Jet engines. Her head snapped up. She keyed her radio with her good hand, voice cracking from dust and blood. Command, Reaper 1, confirm air support visual, I hear engines. A crisp, steady voice came back. Reaper 1, Warhawk 3-2 on station. We have your beacon, mark targets. Riley could have cried, F-16's real help. She forced herself upright, using the boulder as support. Her hand trembled as she grabbed a smoke canister from her vest, the last one. She yanked the pin with her teeth, exhaled, and threw it high into the air. The thick plume rose bright against the dusty sky. Warhawk 3-2 marking position with gray smoke. Hostiles all around valley floor. Danger close. Copy, danger close, the pilot said. We'll do a show of force pass. Hold your position. Hold, easy word to say from 20,000 feet. The roar arrived first, a thunder that swallowed everything else. The jet ripped through the valley so low she could feel the pressure wave hit her chest. The fighters on the ground panicked instantly. The disciplined fire turned chaotic, shouts rising in confusion. Some ran for cover. Others fired wildly at the sky. Riley used that chaos. She spotted her rifle 15 meters downslope, half buried in dust. Every part of her body screamed not to move, but she moved anyway. Sliding, crawling, dragging her arm like dead weight. She reached it, the familiar shape grounded her. She checked the mag, 8 rounds left, 1 in the chamber. She used a nearby rock to prop the rifle for one-handed fire, steadying it against the stone. Every muscle trembled with fatigue, but her sight picture was clear. 3 fighters broke from cover, running across open ground. She didn't waste shots. 3 bursts, 3 bodies. 5 rounds. Warhawk 3-2, I've got targets clustered north side, she transmitted. No friendlies, you are clear. Copy, cleared hot. The next sound was beyond language, the sharp whistle of a GBU-12 cutting through air, followed by a detonation that shook the mountain itself. The northern slope erupted in flame and rock, a thunderous collapse that buried half the remaining fighters. For a second, there was nothing but ringing silence. Then dust, falling like gray rain. She leaned back against the boulder, eyes half closed. The world felt distant, muffled, almost peaceful. Reaper 1 ground team 15 minutes out. Sit tight. Sit tight. She laughed, but it came out more like a cough. Blood crusted along her jaw. Her arm throbbed with every heartbeat. She checked her rifle again out of habit. 5 rounds still chambered. She'd used 31 total now. 31 rounds against 40 men. Not bad math anymore. She could see movement far below, scattered survivors crawling, limping, retreating. Not charging anymore. Not brave anymore. The smell of burnt powder mixed with something else, something cleaner, sharper. Jet fuel from the F-16 pass. The pilot's voice returned. Area secure, Reaper 1. We're staying overhead until ground team reaches you. How copy? Solid copy, she said softly. Appreciate the assist. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. She let her rifle rest across her lap, finally allowing the adrenaline to drain. The tremor started in her hands, then moved up her arms. The delayed shake every soldier knows, the body catching up with what the mind refused to feel during the fight. Now that it was quiet, the pain arrived properly. The bruises from the plate impacts burned with every breath. Her ribs were a dull, stabbing ache. The shrapnel wounds pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She leaned her head back, staring up at the slice of blue sky framed by cliffs. Alive somehow. Minutes blurred. The sound of the jet circling above became a lullaby. At some point her radio crackled again, a different voice this time. Reaper 1, this is Guardian 6. Ground element inbound to your position. ETA 2 mics. Hang in there. She almost smiled. 2 minutes. She could do 2 minutes. Boots crunched on gravel soon after. American voices. Shouts of contact left's clear. And medic up. Riley didn't move. Couldn't. When the medic knelt beside her, his expression froze halfway between awe and horror. Ma'am, you've got shrapnel all over. Dislocated shoulder. Cracked ribs. You should not be conscious. Good thing I didn't get that memo, she rasped. They laughed, quick, nervous laughter, the kind people use when they're trying not to cry. As they lifted her onto a stretcher, she caught sight of the valley floor below, smoke rising, burned-out truck, scattered weapons, dozens of dark shapes lying still. The medic followed her gaze. "Jesus, you did all this." Riley blinked, exhaustion swallowing her words. "Just slowed them down." When the helicopter came, the downdraft whipped her hair across her face. The noise was deafening but comforting. Rescue always sounded like chaos. Major Atrix was waiting when they loaded her aboard. His face was a storm, equal parts relief and fury. "You turned off your radio," he said over the rotors. "Yes, sir." "You disobeyed orders, went in alone, one magazine." "Yes, sir." He stared at her for a long time. It worked. She wanted to smile but couldn't find the energy. Mostly. He glanced back at the valley, counting with his eyes the bodies that littered the rocks. "You realize the board going to tear you apart for this?" Riley's eyes drifted shut. "Probably." "Hell of a shot on that truck, though," he muttered. She didn't answer. Sleep was pulling her under, heavier than the painkillers the medic had just injected. The last thing she saw through the open side door was the valley shrinking below, a smear of smoke and sunlight. The place that had almost become her grave. The place where she'd remembered what she truly was. When she woke again, everything smelled sterile, antiseptic, plastic, and the faint scent of coffee. She was in a field hospital, IV in her arm, shoulder immobilized, ribs bandaged tight. Outside, night pressed against the tent walls. She could hear helicopters coming and going. Her throat was raw. "Status mission," she managed. A nurse leaned over. "Take it easy, Sergeant, you're safe now." "Mission?" Riley repeated, the word slurring. The nurse hesitated, then smiled. "Your guy Kareem Shah, they confirmed the kill an hour ago. Drone footage, he's gone." For a moment, all the noise in her head went quiet. She turned her face away from the light and let out a slow, shaking breath. 30 rounds, 40 enemies, 2 hostages alive, mission complete. Pain radiated through her body, but somewhere underneath it was something like peace, not pride exactly, but relief. The kind that comes when you've carried a burden too long and finally set it down. The nurse adjusted her IV. "You should rest." Riley's eyes stayed open a moment longer, tracing the faint pattern of dust on the ceiling tarp. She whispered mostly to herself. "Sometimes you walk in knowing you won't walk out, and somehow you still do." The nurse didn't reply. She didn't need to. Outside, the night deepened, and the sound of rotors faded into distance. Riley closed her eyes again. And for the first time in weeks, she slept without her hand on her weapon. They told her 3 months had passed. 3 months since the valley. Since the smoke, the ringing, the weight of her own breath sounding like thunder inside a helmet that wouldn't stop vibrating. 3 months since she turned off her radio and walked straight into hell. Now the only thing vibrating was the hum of the fluorescent light above her as she stood at attention inside a briefing room at Fort Bragg. Her left arm hung perfectly straight now, healed, though it still ached when the weather shifted. The scars on her face had faded to pale lines, but the quiet ache behind her eyes, that hadn't gone anywhere. The board members sat behind a long wooden table, 3 colonels and 1 brigadier general, men who'd seen more wars than anyone should. They didn't need explanations. They'd all made impossible choices once, but understanding a decision wasn't the same as forgiving it. "Staff Sergeant Clark," the general began, his tone measured, practiced, heavy. "You disobeyed direct orders from command. You turned off your communications to avoid further instructions, and you conducted offensive operations without authorization. Any one of these actions would justify a court-martial. Together, they justify dismissal." Riley didn't flinch. "Yes, sir, understood." The general looked down at his notes, then back up. "However, you also eliminated a high-value target responsible for multiple American casualties. You saved 2 civilian hostages who would almost certainly have been executed. and you held off a numerically superior force for 12 minutes, alone under fire while wounded. The room went silent. He stood and walked toward her, slow, deliberate. We reviewed your helmet cam footage. His tone softened slightly. You achieved a 94% hit rate with your M4 under extreme duress. You engaged multiple angles, adjusted position dynamically, and maintained tactical awareness while sustaining injuries that should have rendered you combat ineffective. He paused in front of her. You're a damn good soldier, Sergeant. Then his jaw tightened, but a terrible follower of orders. Riley's heartbeat slowed. She didn't speak. Silence was safer. The general studied her a moment longer before returning to his seat. The board has made its decision. Every sound in the room, the rustle of papers, the soft cough from one of the colonels, felt magnified. You will receive a formal reprimand for disobeying orders and disabling your communication equipment. It will remain in your record permanently. You will also complete additional training on proper radio protocol and chain of command. The words hit like small punches. Permanent reprimand. That meant no promotion, no advancement. Her career, the thing she'd sacrificed everything for, was effectively frozen. She swallowed hard. Understood, sir. The general nodded once, however. That single word hung in the air like a lifeline. You are also awarded the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry in action. Your conduct in Valley 7 demonstrated extraordinary courage and exceptional tactical ability. Few soldiers, male or female, could have achieved what you did. Fewer still would have survived it. He held out a small blue box. Inside gleamed the medal. For bravery under fire, he said quietly, and for remembering that sometimes rules bend in the presence of necessity. Her throat tightened, but she kept her face composed as she accepted it. The medal felt heavier than it looked. Don't make me regret not court-martialing you, Sergeant, the general added. No, sir, she said softly, you won't. He gave the faintest nod. Dismissed. Outside, the hall felt cavernous, echoing, sterile. The kind of silence that made you hear your own heartbeat again. Major Atrix was waiting by the door. His uniform looked as sharp as ever, but his eyes carried the tired look of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. He raised an eyebrow when he saw her. So, what's the verdict? Riley held up the box between her fingers. Silver Star and a permanent reprimand. Atrix let out a low whistle. They really couldn't decide if you're a hero or a headache, huh? Seems that way. He studied her for a moment. You know, if those hostages hadn't survived or if you'd been killed, they'd have made an example out of you. I know. He folded his arms, but they didn't die, and neither did you. There was a beat of silence. Then Atrix said quietly, 30 rounds, Riley. You went into a kill zone with one magazine. What were you thinking? She looked past him, at the rows of framed photos on the wall, faces of soldiers who hadn't come home. I was thinking, she said, that sometimes orders protect people on paper, but training protects people in real life. That kind of thinking gets people killed, he said. She met his gaze. That kind of thinking also saved 2 Americans and stopped Karim Shah from killing more. Atrix exhaled slowly, almost smiling. You know, you're either the bravest operator in Delta or the craziest. Maybe both. They stood there a while, neither speaking. Finally, Atrix reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. Your helmet cam footage, officially classified, but I made you a copy. She raised an eyebrow. Why? He shrugged. Because someday, when you start doubting what you did, you'll need to remember what it looked like, what it felt like. Riley took it wordlessly. That night she didn't sleep. The barracks were quiet, lights dimmed. The medal sat on the nightstand beside her bunk, glinting faintly in the half-dark. The flash drive lay next to it. She hadn't plugged it in. Couldn't. Instead, she sat by the window, staring out at the floodlights across the training field. Soldiers ran night drills out there, shadows moving with rifles, shouting commands, boots hitting dirt in rhythm. That used to be her rhythm too. Now she just felt still. Her body had healed, but the silence inside her hadn't. The kind of silence that comes after too much noise, when you've heard enough gunfire that peace itself feels like something missing. She thought of the valley, the way it had looked when the smoke cleared, the smell of iron and dust, the weight of every body that would never move again. And the strangest thing was, she couldn't remember any of their faces clearly, only the eyes, the way one of them had looked at her just before he fell, not hatred, not even fear, just surprise. As if he'd expected something else. She didn't know if that made it better or worse. The next morning her unit was assembled for debrief. Delta didn't do ceremonies. No speeches, no flags, just acknowledgement and continuation. Staff Sergeant Clark, Atrix said, his tone somewhere between pride and warning, "You're cleared for redeployment in 2 weeks. Afghanistan again. This time full support, proper loadout. No solo heroics." She gave a small nod, understood. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "You sure you're ready?" Riley thought about it. About the nightmares that came in flashes, the thud of the RPG, the metallic taste of fear, the deafening roar of the jet overhead. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be," she said finally. Atrix studied her, then nodded once. "Then get some rest. You've earned it." That evening she took a long walk around base. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and jet fuel. Soldiers laughed somewhere behind the hangars. Normal sounds, human sounds. She found herself near the airfield fence, watching a C-17 take off, its engines lighting up the dusk. The vibration rolled through the ground, into her boots, her bones. And for a moment, she wasn't in North Carolina anymore. She was back in that valley. Dust in the air, rifle heavy in her hands, radio silent. She closed her eyes and felt the weight of it again, not the fear but the decision. She'd broken rules. She risked everything. And she'd lived. But living didn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just felt like unfinished business. 2 weeks later she deployed again. New mission, new terrain, different objectives, but everyone in Delta knew her story now. The sergeant who went in alone. 30 rounds, 40 enemies. Survived. Some whispered she was lucky, others called her reckless. Some said she was proof that courage didn't always need permission. Riley didn't listen to any of it. She learned something deeper, that war isn't about glory, it's about moments, the ones where you decide who you are when everything goes wrong. That night, as she sat by the hum of the aircraft on the way to her next mission, she looked down at her hands, the small scars that hadn't fully healed. She thought about the general's words, a terrible follower of orders. Maybe. But as the engines roared and the transport climbed into the dark sky, Riley allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Because in that valley, where she should have died, she hadn't followed orders. She followed something else entirely. Something instinctive, human. The simple, unshakable will to protect. And sometimes, that was the only order that truly mattered. The C-130 rattled like a storm of metal and wind as it cut through the clouds over eastern Afghanistan. Inside, the dim red light washed over the team's faces, quiet, focused, the calm before descent. Riley sat near the ramp, helmet resting on her knee, fingers tracing the edges of the silver star ribbon tied to her vest strap. She didn't wear it for decoration. She wore it as a reminder, a scar that didn't bleed. 30 minutes to drop, the crew chief shouted. She nodded, though she didn't need the reminder. Her mind was already there in the mountains, in the silence, in that pulse before the storm. This mission wasn't supposed to be anything like Valley 7. Full squad, full support, Drone coverage, air cover, quick reaction team on standby, everything by the book. That was the promise. But promises in war had a short shelf life. Across from her, Sergeant Marcus Webb caught her eye. He was the team's weapons specialist, broad-shouldered, easy smile, the kind of soldier who made chaos look like choreography. "You good?" he asked, shouting over the engines. "Define good," she said. He smirked. "You know what I mean." She thought about it, then shrugged. "I'm here." "That'll do." Webb had been there since Delta selection, the brutal months where the military learned how much a human could break and still keep walking. He was one of the few who'd seen her at her worst, and now, she wasn't sure if he was watching her as a friend or as someone the team still didn't fully trust. Riley couldn't blame them. Her story had become a myth on base, the one magazine sergeant, the operator who'd ignored orders, turned off her radio, and somehow lived to tell the tale. The story made her sound unstoppable, but to the ones sitting across from her now, it also made her unpredictable. And in Delta Force, unpredictable could get people killed. The team dropped into Coast Province under moonlight, parachutes whispering open above black mountains. The air was cold, thin, and smelled like gun oil and dust. They landed clean, regrouped fast. 6 operators, one objective, raid a compound suspected of housing a local insurgent cell coordinating cross-border attacks. Simple mission. In theory. Reaper 1, Atrix's voice came through her earpiece, distant but steady. Command has you greenlit. Confirm movement when you breach. Copy command, she replied quietly. Moving. The valley below stretched like an ink stain, shadows and whispers. She crouched behind a rock ledge, scanning through her NVGs. The compound was visible, mud walls, small windows, faint light flickering inside. 2 guards out front, one smoking, one half asleep. Textbook soft target. She signaled hand gestures to the team, 2 up front, 2 flanking, 1 rear security. Webb nodded, rifle raised. They moved like shadows, silent, coordinated. Riley felt the old rhythm return. Not the chaos of Valley 7, not the desperation. This was controlled, surgical. Every breath measured, every step deliberate. Until it was. The first explosion was too close. Not theirs. A tripwire buried shallow, invisible in the dark. The lead man hit it and the world lit up. The blast ripped through the stillness, echoing across the valley. Dust, heat, screaming comms. Contact north wall, someone yelled. Gunfire erupted from the compound. Dozens of muzzle flashes. Not 2 guards, at least 20. Webb grabbed Riley's vest, dragging her behind a wall. Ambush. Her ears rang, heart hammering. For a second the sound of gunfire blurred with another memory, the sound of 40 rifles in Valley 7, the same impossible roar, the same cold flood of realization. Intel was wrong again. She shook it off, forcing focus. Flank right, smoke out. They moved through the chaos, dropping smoke grenades, firing in bursts. Webb laid down suppressive fire while Riley circled the perimeter wall. Her movements were instinctive, body remembering what the mind didn't have time to process. She reached a side window, peered through the scope. Shadows moving fast inside, disciplined, coordinated. This wasn't a ragtag cell. These were trained. Something twisted in her gut. Command, Reaper 1, be advised, this isn't a local militia. Tactical discipline, organized response. We're compromised. Copy that, hold position. Air support 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. She smirked under her breath. Deja vu. She reloaded, signaled to Webb, and together they breached the side wall, explosives cutting through the mud barrier with a dull thump. Inside, the air was thick with dust and smoke, muffled gunfire, yelling in Pashto. They cleared one room, then another. Riley's boots crunched on glass as she turned the corner and froze. A child. maybe 10 years old, barefoot, eyes wide, standing behind a wooden crate clutching something in his hands. Her rifle was up before she even realized it, muscle memory overriding everything else. "Stop, drop it," she barked. The boy trembled, in his shaking hands a detonator. For half a second neither moved. Then Webb appeared beside her. "Clark." She fired. The shot echoed longer than it should have. The detonator clattered to the floor, rolling away. The boy dropped beside it, small, still, silent. The world went very quiet. Riley's hands shook. Her breath came shallow. Webb looked at her, eyes wide, torn between shock and grim understanding. "Clark," he said softly, "you did what you had to." But the words didn't land. She'd seen death, dozens, hundreds, but this one stuck. Because for the first time in her career, she wasn't sure if she'd just saved her team or killed a scared kid who might have never pressed the button. "Move," Webb urged. "We'll deal with it later." She nodded, but the image wouldn't leave. The trembling hands, the way he'd looked at her, not hatred, just confusion. Like he didn't understand why she'd pulled the trigger either. Air support arrived minutes later. The compound burned under the precise fire of 2 Hellfires. The noise rolled through the valley like thunder, but Riley barely heard it. They exfiltrated at dawn. The mission was officially successful. Casualties neutralized. No friendly losses. But Riley couldn't shake the weight of that single shot. In the debrief tent, Atrix's voice came through the radio again. "Reaper 1, strong work. You and Webb stabilized the breach. You just saved 6 lives." Riley stared at her hands. "Copy," she said hollowly. Webb sat beside her, wiping dust from his rifle. He didn't speak at first. Then quietly, "You did what you had to do." She didn't answer. Because maybe that was true, but truth didn't always bring peace. That night, she sat alone outside the forward operating base. The stars above Afghanistan were cruelly beautiful, bright and endless, the same stars she'd looked up at after Valley 7. The desert wind bit cold against her skin. Her shoulder ached from recoil, her eyes heavy from exhaustion. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the flash drive Atrix had given her. She carried it through every mission since, still hadn't watched it. Until now. She plugged it into her tablet. The video opened instantly, helmet cam footage. Her own voice, ragged and calm at once. Gunfire, smoke, breathing. She watched herself dive behind rocks, saw her own rifle rise, fire, reload, saw the explosion, the smoke, the dust. And then silence. She turned up the volume, could hear her own voice whisper, "Sometimes you walk in so someone else can walk out." She paused the video there. Because now, after tonight, she wasn't sure what that sentence meant anymore. The next morning, Command called another briefing. New intel, new objectives. The war never paused long enough for reflection. But before they left the tent, Atrix caught her by the arm. "You did good work last night," he said. She met his eyes. "Did I?" He frowned. "You kept your team alive." "At what cost?" "Riley, this is war. There's always a cost." She nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I'm starting to wonder if surviving is always the same as winning." He didn't have an answer for that. Nobody ever did. Later that day, as the sun rose high over the endless ridgelines, Riley stood at the edge of the fob, her rifle slung, her helmet under one arm. Behind her, soldiers trained, shouted, laughed, the sounds of life trying to be normal in a place built for anything but. In front of her stretched the horizon, harsh, golden, unforgiving. She thought of the valley, of the boy, of the metal sitting heavy in her duffel. And she realized something simple but sharp. Survival wasn't the hardest part of war. It was learning how to keep living afterward. They sent her east again, different patch of dust, same taste of war. Kunar province this time, joint task force with allied special units. New flag patches on sleeves, new accents on the radio, same uncertainty humming beneath every briefing. Riley stood on the flight line beside a cluster of helicopters, dawn lights spilling orange across the concrete. Webb approached from behind, coffee in one hand, helmet in the other. "You ever notice," he said, "every new place smells the same, diesel, sand, and nerves." She smirked. "You forgot fear." He grinned. "That too." They were heading to assist a coalition strike team tracking a weapons convoy rumored to be supplying multiple insurgent cells. Officially, Riley was just a liaison, observe, coordinate, advise. Nothing more. Unofficially, everyone knew she didn't know how to just watch. The chopper skimmed the tree line, blades carving through the thin air. Below them, ridges and dry riverbeds stretched for miles. Riley watched the terrain blur by, her thoughts drifting. Orders were simple. Observe the convoy route. Confirm the cache site. Call in support. Do not engage without authorization. 3 months ago, those instructions would have sounded like handcuffs. Now, they sounded like a chance to prove she could still follow the rules. At least, that's what she told herself. The helicopter touched down on a ridge overlooking the valley. Dust exploded around them as the team piled out. Riley hit the ground running, scanning for landmarks, her rifle snug against her shoulder. "Command, Reaper 1 on site. Eyes en route," she transmitted. "Copy, Reaper 1. Hold observation until convoy is confirmed." She dropped to a prone position behind a rock shelf and adjusted her optics. Through the scope, the road snaked along the valley floor, empty, quiet, too quiet. Minutes crawled by. Then movement. A small truck at first, then 2, then 6. Each vehicle bristled with armed men. Dust trails rose behind them, glittering in the morning light like smoke from ghosts. Webb's voice came through her headset. "That's a lot more than Intel promised." "Yeah," Riley said softly. "Intel's been generous lately." She zoomed in. Something in the last truck caught her eye, metal crates stacked and tarped, edges glinting dull silver. Not food, not fuel. Missiles. Her gut tightened. "Command, this is Reaper 1. Visual confirmation of weapons-grade ordnance. You need to reroute air support now." Static, then, negative, Reaper 1. Drone feed incomplete. We need satellite confirmation before engaging. She lowered the scope. "They'll be gone by then." "Those are the orders," Command replied. Riley stared down the valley, jaw clenched. The convoy was turning toward the mountain pass, a natural choke point. In 10 minutes, they'd vanish into Pakistan. Her thumb brushed the safety of her rifle. No, not again. She forced herself to exhale. "Copy, Command, holding position." She felt Webb's eyes on her. "You actually gonna sit this one out?" She gave a thin smile. "That's the plan." He chuckled. "Since when do your plans survive first contact?" "Since I got tired of being the cautionary tale." He nodded, though he didn't look convinced. The convoy slowed as it reached the pass. 2 men stepped out to clear debris from the road. Riley's trigger finger twitched. Perfect range, perfect angle. Then something changed. A figure emerged from the second truck. A woman, headscarf loose, hands bound behind her back. Her face turned briefly toward the ridge. Even through the scope, Riley could see it, the unmistakable shape of fear. "Hostage." "Webb," she whispered. He saw it too. Command didn't say anything about civilians. Maybe they didn't know. Riley's mind raced. If she called air support now, the woman would die. If she waited, the convoy would cross the border. Command's voice crackled again. "Reaper 1, update status." She hesitated. The moment stretched thin, tight as wire. Then she said, "Convoy still moving. No clear strike window." "Copy," Command replied, unaware of what she wasn't saying. Webb turned to her. "We can't just—" "I know," she cut in. but we can't open fire without proof she's alive when they report back. Proof, he gestured toward the valley. She is alive. Riley's hands trembled slightly, not officially. The woman stumbled as a guard shoved her forward. The sound didn't reach their position, but Riley could feel it anyway. That quiet, helpless motion. The same kind of helplessness she'd seen in every village they'd ever arrived at 5 minutes too late. She looked through her scope again, heart pounding. Her orders were clear, but orders didn't have eyes. Orders didn't see faces. "Don't," Webb said softly, as if reading her thoughts. Riley didn't answer, because deep down she already knew she would. She radioed quietly to the Allied unit's forward controller. "Eagle 1, this is Reaper 1. I've got visual on high-value ordnance and one non-combatant. If I mark targets manually, can you hold fire until I clear the hostage?" The reply came after a pause. "That's not per protocol, Reaper 1. Neither is letting her die." Static then understood, "Mark your own discretion." Webb shook his head. "You're gonna get yourself buried in paperwork again." Riley smirked. "Only if I survive." She slung her rifle, adjusted her vest, and started moving down the ridge. "Clark, what the hell are you doing?" "Creating a window." He swore under his breath but followed anyway. They moved fast, keeping low through the rocks, closing the distance until the convoy's shouts became words. The guards were distracted, arguing over something near the lead truck. Riley slid into position behind a boulder 20 meters from the woman. She could see her face now, dust-covered, eyes darting. Fear, confusion, hope. She raised her radio. "Eagle 1, stand by. Do not engage until I mark green." Then she looked at Webb. "On my signal, suppress left flank." He nodded, jaw set. She waited for the wind to shift, for the right second, the one that always comes between chaos and consequence. Then she moved. It happened in 3 heartbeats. First heartbeat, Riley rose from cover, firing 2 precise shots. The guards near the woman dropped instantly. Second heartbeat, Webb opened up, laying fire across the trucks. Fighters scrambled, returning fire wildly. Third heartbeat, Riley sprinted forward, grabbed the hostage, and dragged her behind the overturned crate. Bullets shredded the ground inches away. "Command Reaper 1, hostage secured, initiate strike." "Confirmed," came the reply. Then the sky roared. 2 missiles streaked down, bright trails cutting across the pale morning. The explosions hit the lead vehicles dead-on, turning metal to flame. Shock waves rolled through the valley, flinging dust and debris like rain. Riley shielded the woman, holding her tight until the thunder passed. When the smoke cleared, only silence remained. Hours later, the rescue helicopter lifted them from the valley. The woman, an aid worker missing for weeks, sat wrapped in a blanket beside her. Webb was across from them, face streaked with soot, grinning despite the bruises. "Still think you can follow orders?" he asked over the rotor noise. Riley smiled faintly. "I did follow them, just edited the footnotes." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're unbelievable. Just stubborn." She looked down at the valley shrinking below. Another scar on a map full of scars. This time she hadn't needed 30 rounds, just one decision. But it still carried the same weight. Back at base, the debrief was mercifully short. Command congratulated the team. The rescued woman was safe, the weapons destroyed. Official reports would call it a coordinated coalition success. No mention of the detour. No mention of the rule, bent for a single life. Later, alone in her quarters, Riley sat by the dim light of a single lamp, writing in her field notebook, a habit she'd picked up since the reprimand. Day 212. Different valley, same choice. Sometimes I think war isn't about who's right. It's about who decides when enough is enough. She paused, pen hovering, then added, "Today felt like the first time in months I didn't feel like a weapon." She closed the notebook and leaned back. Outside, helicopters came and went. The world kept moving, the war kept turning. But for once, her heartbeat didn't. For once, she felt still. In the weeks that followed, Riley noticed something subtle change around her. The way soldiers looked at her in the mess hall. Not fear, not awe, just respect, the quiet kind. Word had spread again, as it always did. She'd broken orders, again. But this time it wasn't reckless, it was human. Even Atrix, when he called her in, didn't yell. He just sighed. "You really can't help yourself, can you?" She smiled, "Not when there's someone to save." He shook his head, but there was pride behind the frustration. "You know what your problem is, Sergeant. I've got a few. You still believe people are worth the risk." Riley thought about that for a long time before answering. "Yes, sir, I do." He nodded. "Then keep believing it. Just try not to make me explain it to another board." That night she sat outside again, watching the desert stars. Webb joined her quietly, 2 mugs of instant coffee in hand. "Another day, another lecture," he said. "Story of my life." They sat in silence a while, the wind whispering through the wire. "Hey," he said finally, "you ever wonder if maybe that valley didn't break you, it just showed you who you were?" Riley looked up at the stars. "Maybe it didn't break me," she said softly. "Maybe it just took away everything that wasn't me." And for the first time in a long time, she smiled without pain. The first thing she noticed back home was the silence. Not the kind that meant safety. The kind that rang in her ears like an echo of gunfire that refused to fade. Riley stood at the edge of the airfield, duffel slung over one shoulder, wind cutting across the tarmac. Planes landed, trucks moved, but none of it felt real. After months of sand, heat, and adrenaline, America looked too clean, too still. A bus waited to take her and a handful of other returnees to Fort Bragg. Someone was laughing about coffee and fast food. Another was texting. Normal things. She envied how easily they slipped back into routine, as if war were something you could just unzip and leave behind. When the bus pulled away, she watched the landscape blur by green trees, gas stations, sunlight flashing through the windows. Her reflection in the glass looked older, not by years but by weight. The days that followed were an exercise in pretending. Mandatory counseling, physical assessments, debriefs. Everyone wanted reports, statements, signatures, evidence she was still operational. "Any recurring nightmares?" the psychologist asked, pen poised above his clipboard. "Just the usual," she said. He gave a knowing smile. "Do you want to talk about them?" She thought about the valley, the child in coast, the roar of the jets, the silence afterward. Not particularly. He wrote something down, probably avoidant behavior. She didn't correct him. When the session ended, he said, "You did extraordinary things out there, Sergeant." Riley paused at the door. Extraordinary is just what people call it when they don't have to live with it. Weeks passed. She trained, ran, lifted, shot at ranges. The routine should have grounded her, but the motions felt mechanical, disconnected. At night she'd wake to the faint, metallic taste of dust in her throat. Sometimes she'd reach for a weapon that wasn't there. The Army called it adjustment. She called it unfinished war. Then one morning, Atrix called her into his office. "You're getting a different kind of mission," he said. Riley raised an eyebrow. "Domestic." "Training assignment. Joint tactical instruction for the next batch of operators." She frowned. "You want me to teach?" "You've seen more in 2 years than most of them will in 10, he said. "They need that experience. You need the distance." She studied him, trying to read between the lines. "You mean I need to stop shooting at things?" "That too," he said with a half-smile. She wanted to argue, to insist she was fine, that she belonged out there, but the truth was, part of her was tired. Tired in a way rest couldn't fix. "Fine," she said. "When do I start?" The classroom smelled of coffee and disinfectant. Rows of new recruits, young, restless, confident, sat waiting, as she stepped to the front in fatigues that still carried dust from somewhere far away. "Staff Sergeant Riley Clark," she began, "Delta Force, Afghanistan Kunar Coast. If you're here, it means someone thinks you can do what we do. They're wrong." A few nervous laughs, she let them fade. "You won't learn courage here," she continued. "You'll learn how to act when courage isn't enough, how to think when panic screams louder than orders." She watched their faces, saw reflections of who she used to be, belief without consequence. One trainee raised a hand. "Ma'am, what's the hardest part of combat?" She thought of the boy of the valley, of the weight of silence. "Coming home," she said. The room went still. That night she sat alone on the training range bleachers, watching flares drift over the distant hills. Webb joined her, 2 paper cups of vending machine coffee in hand. "Look at you," he said. "Instructor Clark didn't think I'd live to see that." "Neither did I." He took a sip, grimaced. "Still terrible coffee. Some things never change." They sat in easy quiet for a while. Then Webb said, "You ever think about getting out, civilian life?" She laughed softly. "And do what? Start a podcast, sell survival gear?" "I'm serious." She looked down at the cup in her hands. "The uniform's the only thing that still makes sense." He nodded. "Yeah, but maybe sense isn't the same as peace." She didn't answer, because peace for her had become theoretical, something she could describe in mission terms but couldn't remember feeling. Months went by. The trainees rotated out, new ones came in. She taught them tactics, patience, composure under fire. But beneath every lesson was a warning she never voiced. No amount of training prepares you for the part that breaks quietly. One afternoon, a young recruit stayed after class. "Sergeant," he said, hesitant, "is it true what they say about Valley 7? Riley froze for half a second. "What exactly do they say?" "That you went in alone with one magazine, 40 enemies, and made it out." She almost smiled. "They leave out the parts that hurt." "Still," he said, eyes bright with awe, "that's what heroism looks like, right?" Heroism. The word felt foreign. She thought of the radio static, the bruises, the blood that never quite washed out. "Heroism," she said slowly, "isn't what it looks like, it's what it costs." The recruit didn't know how to answer, and she didn't expect him to. That evening, she finally opened her notebook again. Day 347. Teaching now. Easier to tell others how to survive than to remember why I did. Maybe the valley never ends, it just changes shape. She closed it and looked out the window. Rain traced thin lines down the glass. For once, she let herself feel the weight of it, not as punishment, but as proof she was still human. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. She answered. "Staff Sergeant Clark." The voice was calm, clipped. "This is Colonel Arden, Joint Special Operations. We're assembling a small advisory unit for an allied program overseas. Voluntary placement. We'd like you on it." Riley blinked. "Another combat deployment?" "Not exactly. Training, field evaluation, risk assessment, but it's operational, classified." She hesitated. "Why me?" "Because you make decisions when others hesitate," he said. "And because you know the difference between orders and instincts." For a long moment she said nothing, then quietly, "Send the brief." When the call ended, she sat still, feeling the old pulse again, the faint, dangerous thrill that came with purpose. Webb would call it addiction. She called it gravity. Maybe she wasn't done after all. 2 weeks later, she boarded another military transport, destination undisclosed. As the aircraft lifted off, she felt the vibration beneath her boots, the familiar hum that meant movement, momentum, mission. Outside the window, the world turned to cloud. She leaned back, eyes half closed, remembering what the general had told her months ago. "You're a damn good soldier, but a terrible follower of orders." Maybe that was true, But somewhere between defiance and duty, she'd found something else, a kind of honesty that only exists in people who have seen how fragile life really is. Hours later, she stepped off the plane into heat that felt like memory. Another desert, another horizon of dust and flame, different coordinates, same sky. She adjusted her gear and smiled faintly. "Round two," she whispered. The air smelled of jet fuel and sand, the perfume of every beginning and every ending she'd ever known. For the first time, she didn't feel haunted by the valley, because she carried it now, not as a wound but as a compass. Every step forward was proof she'd already survived the worst day of her life. And maybe, just maybe, that meant everything after could be lived on her own terms. The heat hit her first, thick, dry, relentless. Somewhere far east of where she'd last fought, the air shimmered above the tarmac and smelled of dust and diesel. A new flag flew over the base gate, but everything else felt familiar. The noise of engines, the scent of oil, the half-finished buildings surrounded by sandbags. Riley slung her pack over one shoulder and followed the liaison officer toward a line of temporary structures. "Welcome to Forward Site Aegis," the officer said. "Joint mission, American, British, and local forces. You're here as tactical advisor, not command, not enforcement. Observe, train, recommend." "Observe," she repeated, half smiling. "That always goes well for me." He didn't catch the sarcasm. Inside the operations tent, maps covered every wall, routes, zones, names she didn't know yet. A dozen soldiers of mixed nationalities sat around a table, arguing quietly over supply convoys. Colonel Mason, the British officer in charge, looked up when she entered. Sergeant Clark heard the stories. "Good ones or bad ones, sir?" "The kind that keep people alive," he said. "Take a seat." She liked him immediately. Direct, unreadable, no wasted words. The briefing was short. Insurgents were hijacking aid convoys headed for villages still recovering from years of conflict. The attackers were well-armed, disciplined, and, according to intercepted chatter, led by a man trained by Western contractors years ago. Riley felt a chill at that. The circle never stopped closing. Her task was to evaluate the local unit assigned to protect the next delivery. The unit's leader, Captain Arif Rahman, had once served alongside U.S. forces. Now he fought to hold together what remained of his country's fractured army. "Be their eyes," Mason said, "and their conscience if you can." Conscience, a strange word to use in a war zone. Captain Arif met her outside the tent that evening. Mid-30s, sharp gaze, the posture of someone who'd seen too much but refused to bend under it. "You're the American," he said, "the one from the story." "Depends which story." "The one with one magazine." She gave a thin smile. "That's me." He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "I lost 12 men in that valley. Different side of the border, same mountains. Maybe we should both hate the mountains." "Maybe," she said, "but they don't care either way." He almost smiled at that. "Come, I'll show you what we're protecting." They walked to the motor pool where aid trucks were being loaded, flour, medicine, water filters. Nothing heroic, just survival in cardboard boxes. Children's laughter floated from the nearby refugee camp. Arif gestured toward them. "If we fail, they starve. If we succeed, they still remember the wrong flag on the boxes." Riley nodded. "Then we protect the boxes anyway." 2 days later, the convoy rolled out, 6 trucks, 2 technicals, a handful of local soldiers, and Riley riding shotgun beside Arif. The desert stretched endless ahead. Heat shimmered on the road like liquid glass. She kept scanning the horizon, the habit of someone who'd already survived an ambush and refused to trust silence. Halfway through the route, the radio crackled. A warning, unknown vehicles ahead. Riley grabbed her binoculars. 3 pickups blocking the road, weapons mounted. "Could be locals," Arif said, slowing the lead truck. They're not waving. She could see movement, men fanning out along the ridge, professional spacing, too clean for bandits. Set defense, she ordered automatically. Arif hesitated. Our orders are to avoid escalation. They already started it. Before he could answer, a shot rang out. The bullet punched through the windshield of the second truck. The world erupted. Riley dove for cover as return fire cracked through the air. Dust exploded around them, engines revving, shouts in 3 languages overlapping. Arif grabbed the radio. This is Falcon Unit, under attack coordinates. Static, then nothing. Riley crawled to the rear tire, scanning the ridge. She counted 8 attackers on the left slope, more on the right. Trained, coordinated. And they weren't shooting to kill, they were shooting to steal. They want the trucks, she shouted to Arif. He nodded grimly. Then we burn them before they take them. She blinked. You destroy the aid. If they get it, they'll trade it for weapons. I won't feed the men who will shoot us tomorrow. Her stomach twisted. Civilians would starve, but he wasn't wrong either. Commanders made choices. Soldiers lived with ghosts. Do it, she said quietly. They signaled the drivers. One by one, the fuel caps were loosened, ignition grenades armed. Riley covered them, firing controlled bursts into the ridge. The first explosion rolled across the plain, a bloom of orange and black. The attackers hesitated, thrown by the sudden loss of prize. Arif shouted orders in his language. His men rallied, pushing fire uphill. Within minutes, the ridge went silent except for echoing gunfire fading into distance. Then came the smell, the bitter stench of burned flour and diesel. The aid was gone, but the convoy was alive. Later, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, Riley sat on a broken crate beside what was left of the trucks. Arif approached, wiping soot from his hands. Command will not be pleased, he said. Command never is. He studied her. Do you regret it? She looked toward the rising smoke. I regret that every choice here costs the wrong people. He nodded slowly. You sound like someone who's fought too long to believe in clean victories. Maybe I just stopped believing they exist. They stood in silence until the first stars appeared. Come tomorrow, Arif said. I'll show you the village this food was meant for. Maybe seeing what we lost will remind us why we still fight. The next day, they drove north through a valley lined with shattered houses. Children watched from doorways, thin as shadows. The truck stopped at a well where women filled buckets from muddy water. Riley stepped out, the stairs following her, foreign uniform, foreign face. An old man approached. You bring food? He asked in broken English. She swallowed, not this time. His eyes dropped. Then you bring nothing. She had no answer. Arif spoke softly beside her. They won't remember who burned the trucks, only who didn't feed them. That night she couldn't sleep. The sound of the explosion replayed in her mind, not as victory but as failure with justification attached. She wrote in her notebook. Day 402. Sometimes mercy looks like surrender. Sometimes survival looks like betrayal. A week later, command ordered them to prepare for another run, this time with heavier escort. Riley recommended doubling reconnaissance drones and shifting route timing. The British colonel approved. But Arif was quiet afterward. You think they'll come again? She asked. They always come again. He looked at her a long moment. You fight like a soldier, but you think like a poet. Dangerous combination. Only for me, she said. He smiled faintly. Then stay dangerous, we need that. On the night before departure, she stood outside her tent watching the horizon flicker with lightning. Somewhere beyond those mountains, another ambush waited, another impossible decision. She realized something then. Command could give orders, politics could assign borders, but the war had become smaller for her now. Not nations, just people, faces, choices. Every trigger pulled, was a sentence written in someone else's life. And she was tired of writing endings. At dawn, she walked toward the convoy again, rifle slung, helmet tucked under her arm. The air was cool, carrying the first hints of storm. Webb's voice crackled in her earpiece from halfway across the world. Routine check-in, just like old times. "You still out there saving everyone who doesn't want saving?" he asked. She smiled, trying not to make too big a mess this time. "Riley," his tone softened. "Just remember, you can't fix the world. You can only hold your corner of it." She looked at the trucks lined up before her, at Arif briefing his men, at the villagers watching from a distance. "Then I'll hold it," she said, "as long as it takes." The engine started, dust rose, the road stretched ahead, another valley, another choice waiting at the end of it. And as the convoy rolled forward into the morning light, Riley Clark felt the strange, steady calm that only came before uncertainty. The kind that whispered not of victory, but of purpose. The storm came at dawn. Not with rain, but with the heavy wind that carried dust like ash. The horizon disappeared in pale haze, and the world turned the same color as the fear that lived between heartbeats. Riley pulled her scarf tighter around her neck and climbed into the lead vehicle. The convoy engines rumbled awake one by one, blending with the low growl of the approaching storm. Visibility was dropping fast, but delay wasn't an option. The aid had to move, the villages were running out of water, and this time there was no backup shipment coming. Arif climbed in beside her. "You trust your instincts?" he asked. "More than I trust maps," she said. He nodded, and for a moment their silence felt like an understanding. Two soldiers from different worlds, both held together by duty and fatigue. Then they rolled out. The road narrowed quickly, sand swirling across the valley floor like fog. Through the windshield, visibility shrank to almost nothing. The trucks behind faded in and out of the haze. Riley kept her eyes moving, watching the ridges, the dunes, every shadow. But the world was soft-edged and untrustworthy. She reached for the radio. "Falcon lead to all units, reduce spacing, check comms every 30 seconds. If you lose visual, stop, copy." Crackled affirmations followed. Then silence. Wind, dust, nothing else. She glanced at Arif. "If I were planning an ambush." He finished for her. "I'd wait for a storm like this." The next second proved them both right. The first explosion tore through the second truck, a bloom of fire swallowed by dust. The shockwave hit the lead vehicle, throwing Riley forward against the dash. "Contact, contact," Arif shouted into the radio. But the signal drowned in static. Riley threw open the door, hit the ground running, scanning for muzzle flashes. Shapes moved in the haze, dark figures flanking from both sides. The perfect trap. She ducked behind the truck and returned fire, controlled bursts into the shifting blur. Bullets hissed past her ear. The dust made it impossible to tell where they were coming from or how many. Then over the chaos she heard Arif yell, "They're going for the aid trucks." Of course they were, the same motive, the same story. Only this time she wasn't willing to burn everything to save nothing. "Hold the line," she shouted. "Don't fire on the cargo." She sprinted toward the convoy center, heart hammering, every muscle remembering a dozen other valleys where she'd done this same impossible dance. One truck engine was on fire, another had lost a wheel. A young soldier lay beside it, clutching his leg, terrified. Riley knelt beside him. "You're not dying today," she said, dragging him to cover. Her hands shook, not from fear but from memory. Every face blurred with another she'd already lost. The firefight stretched on, brutal, directionless, half-blind. Then through the haze she saw a familiar silhouette, the man leading the attackers. Tall, confident, moving with the precision of someone trained. She tracked him through her scope. There was no mistaking it, Western-style gear, steady stance, the deliberate calm of someone who once knew the same rules she did. "Arif," she said into the radio, "your intel was right. Whoever's running this learned from us. Can you take him?" Riley hesitated. He wasn't just a target, he was a reflection, what she could have become if she'd stopped believing in lines. Then she squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed, clean and final. The figure dropped, the others faltered. And just like that, the storm began to break. When the firing stopped, all that was left was the wind. Bodies half buried in dust, trucks smoking, the smell of burnt metal and diesel. Riley sat down beside the tire, breathing hard, dust streaking her face. Her rifle lay across her knees. Arif approached, limping slightly. "We held them." "Barely." He glanced toward the horizon. "You killed him, didn't you? The one who used to be like you." She nodded. "Maybe that's why it hurts more than it should." Arif crouched beside her. "Sometimes the enemy is just what we could have become if someone hadn't stopped us." Riley looked at him, and for the first time in months, her eyes softened. "Then maybe that's what we're really fighting for." Hours later, the convoy finally reached the village. News had already spread about the ambush, about the survival. The people came out of their homes, cautious at first, then grateful. Children ran to the trucks as boxes of supplies were lowered. Riley stood aside, watching them. Her uniform was caked in dust, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion, but inside something quiet settled. The villagers didn't thank her, they didn't know her name. And somehow that felt right. This was never about recognition. It was about restoring balance to a place where right and wrong had been buried under rubble and politics. She caught Arif's gaze across the crowd. He gave a small nod, one soldier to another. No medals, no speeches, just understanding. That night she sat alone outside the outpost, writing in her notebook for the last time. The wind was gentle now, the stars bright enough to see her reflection in the ink. Day 467. Mission complete. Cargo delivered, lost 3 men, saved 20 others. Every choice still feels like a half measure between mercy and survival. Maybe that's what war really is, not a test of courage, but of how much compassion survives inside the uniform. She paused, pen hovering, then wrote one more line. "I'm still here, maybe that's enough." She closed the notebook and looked up. The sound of distant laughter drifted from the village, real, human, fragile. It felt like redemption, not loud or cinematic, just quiet enough to mean something. Weeks later, when she finally rotated home, the base felt smaller, the sky bluer, the world somehow less sharp. Webb met her at the airport, same crooked grin, same battered truck. "Still alive," he said, taking her bag. "Barely," she replied. He studied her face. "You look different." "I feel different." He opened the truck door for her. "Good different." She smiled faintly, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. They drove in silence, city lights flickering through the windshield. At a stoplight, Webb glanced over. "You think you're done this time?" She looked out the window, where people crossed streets, bought coffee, laughed like nothing fragile had ever existed. "Maybe I'm not done," she said softly. "Maybe I'm just finally learning to live between battles." Months passed. She moved to a quiet town near the coast, taught marksmanship at a local academy, rarely talked about the war. Sometimes, when the wind was right, she'd walk to the edge of the cliffs and watch the horizon. Not looking for enemies, just breathing. The world still had edges, still had scars, but so did she. And she'd learned to live with both. One evening, as the sun sank into the sea, a young student approached her after class. "Ma'am," he asked, "were you ever afraid out there?" Riley thought for a long moment. The waves crashed softly below. "Always," she said, "but fear isn't the enemy. Forgetting why you're afraid, that's what gets you killed." The student nodded, unsure, then walked off. Riley watched him go, smiling faintly. Some lessons didn't need to be written down. Later that night, she sat on her porch, notebook open on her lap, the final page blank. The ocean breeze carried the faint sound of laughter from the village nearby, echoes of peace she once thought she'd never hear again. She didn't write this time, she didn't need to. Because for once, her story didn't end in fire or silence. It just ended. Softly, honestly. And in that stillness, she finally understood what the valley had been trying to teach her all along. That sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.